Morning, everyone. We're expecting more people to arrive, but we're going to get started right on time so that we don't take up too much of your valuable time and very busy time right now. My name is Doug Gray. I am the MOLLI director. Welcome to the webinar From Surviving to Thriving with Your Online Program. The webinar today is sponsored by MOLLI, which is the Maryland Online Leadership Institute, and also by our parent organization, Maryland Online. MOLLI will be offering its 4th Residential Leadership Development Institute this coming June. So we will be sending out more information on that experience. Keep an eye out for it. We've offered a series of webinars for this year, and we're going to have one more coming up in March before the end of the academic year. Before I turn things over to our panel, let me remind everyone that this is an interactive experience, but please keep your microphones muted for the panelists to be heard by everyone. Also remember that we can see you if your cameras are on, even if your microphone is off. We've had some embarrassing situations in the recent past due to that. So, but if you have questions or comments or concerns, please use the chat box to put those down. You can find the chat down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our panelists today include Michelle Kloss from Carroll Community College, Barbara Marinak from Mount St. Mary's University, and Rhonda Spells-Fentry from Prince George's Community College. Rhonda, in addition to being one of our panelists, will also be moderating today's session. So thank you all for joining us today. And Rhonda, it's over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, panelists, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So when we first talked about doing a webinar called Surviving to Thriving, the first thing I thought was 7 months ago. What were we thinking in February of 2020? And the thought that in a few short weeks that we would have transitioned all of our college operations, instruction, workers to a remote posture was inconceivable. The past 7 months have been unlike anything I would imagine everyone in this call has, nothing like we've experienced personally or professionally in our lifetimes. So when we think about working remotely prior to this pandemic, I don't know about your institution, but at our institution, working remotely was still one of those things we weren't really sure about. We were still wondering if that was an optimal or even an acceptable way for us to work. Then when we think about online learning, we had online learning as a part of our offerings, but campus face-to-face instruction was still the star of the show. So now here we are, it's October 2020, and we have survived, at least till now. Now we're thinking about how do we move from surviving to thriving? So today's webinar, and thank you, Michelle and Barbara, for joining me today. And today what we are going to really talk about is, how do we, first we started with the crisis moment, and now this is becoming, in our institution, we call it our next normal. And how do we, so today we're really going to talk about how do we thrive in spite of all that's going on. So to set the context, I'm going to give each panelist an opportunity to share a little bit about their background and a little bit about their role in the transition of moving to remote learning and instruction. And also, if you could just share, again, for the context is, where is your institution now? Are you remote? Are you on campus? Are you hybrid? What's going on at your institution? And then after we set that context, then we'll get into the meat of our session. So Michelle, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you very much. As mentioned, I work at Carroll Community College, where I serve as the Associate Provost of Assessment and Institutional Research. And even though my title doesn't sound like it, part of my role at Carroll is to oversee online learning, which is actually probably one of my very favorite parts of the job. Much like Rhonda described at Carroll, prior to the pandemic, we were very campus focused. We did have fully asynchronous online courses, but they were really a percentage of our offerings. So like everybody else, we made a very quick pivot to online in March, and also adopted the remote synchronous format at that time so that we could continue to offer that interactive component for our previously face-to-face courses. At Carroll right now in the fall, we are still principally remote. We have opened the campus, and we have a very limited number of courses that are meeting on campus, sometimes in a rotation format for students. Our staff is doing kind of again, a rotational coverage of our offices so that we can offer some face-to-face student support if needed. But principally, we are delivering our instruction through asynchronous online courses, which make up about a third of our courses right now, or through our remote synchronous option, which is based in Microsoft Teams.
Awesome. Thank you. Barbara?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Barb Marinak. I'm the Dean of the School of Education at Mount St. Mary's University, and that might sound a little odd, but in terms of online learning and the pandemic as we're transitioning. But several years ago, as we began thinking about, quite frankly, primarily our graduate programs, we made the decision to house the Center for Instructional Design and Delivery. It's called CID at the Mount. We made the decision to house that in the School of Education because we wanted the primary focus to be on pedagogy as we began transitioning to online instruction. We certainly have a Center for Instructional Technology that manages our hardware, but we were much more concerned about platforms and tools and pedagogy. So we made the decision to house CID in the School of Education. So CID had already been established. I just finished an article for the Mount Magazine where the president asked me to do exactly what we're doing now. Think about the pandemic and what lessons have we learned. And I recall starting the article with a very odd statement that we were well positioned for the pandemic. That sounds weird. Nobody wants a pandemic. Nobody wants to be well positioned for the pandemic. But we were, because we had established CID. We have an instructional designer. She's a faculty member with a PhD in technology facilitation. I have 2 instructional technologists. Those folks were already in place, and we were already moving some of our graduate programs online when the pandemic hit, primarily our MBA program, which is one of our largest business programs. And so CID was already at work. The other major decision that we had made and already implemented was we moved to Canvas as our learning management system. And Canvas is a next generation LMS that allows us a great deal of integration flexibility and options for lots of plugins, et cetera. We had, interestingly enough, just about 2 months before the pandemic hit, made the decision, we did not go with Teams. We looked at both Teams and Zoom, and we made the decision for pedagogical reasons to go with Zoom. And we had just finished the integration between Canvas and Zoom about 6 weeks before the pandemic hit. So when I say we were well positioned, and you'll notice I haven't mentioned faculty yet, but in terms of our hardware, we were in pretty good shape. We had also built several Zoom classrooms. We have dual enrollment with a number of Catholic high schools. So we were already remoting high school students into our face-to-face classes. And we had worked out the bugs of several of those Zoom rooms. So we were playing with Zoom rooms in addition to integrating Zoom into our learning management system. So we had made some mistakes along the way, several years before COVID hit, and had some pretty important tools in place. Our faculty, quite frankly, they were still learning Canvas. It was not mandatory at this point, other than to upload a syllabus. So all the back end pieces we felt good about, but boy, in mid-March, and we'll talk about this, our challenge was working with faculty. At this point, the Mount is face-to-face, and knock wood, we are striving to get to our semester ends face-to-face on the 20th of November. We're going to send our students home for one more week of remote instruction, and then they do their finals. And we have, the Mount is, as you all know, is a 200+ old institution. And all of our residence halls are, in terms of, this sounds weird, I know, but you've all read about this, is our wastewater treatment plant is part of the university. And all of our residence halls are segregated from one another. So we test our wastewater in our residence halls every week. And that's how we target the individual students who get tested. We are testing and tracing every single week. And we really do believe that's how we've been able to stay face-to-face this long.
Awesome. Thank you, Barb.
Sure.
Thank you, Barb. And so already we can see some potential differences, right? 4 years face-to-face, community college, given the commuter nature, not so much. And so I'm looking forward to a really exciting discussion. I'm going to share our story at Prince George's. Initially, I was asked to be the moderator, but in my role at Prince George's Community College, I'm the vice president for enterprise technology, which there's a whole nother webinar within this webinar, because at our institution, online learning is inside of technology. So we're now seeing 3 different models of how online education is being sort of managed and led within our institutions. And so at Prince George's Community College, so when we went to make the shift back in March as the vice president for technology, online learning was one strand, but also myself and my team were responsible for getting all of our staff and all of our students sort of positioned to work and learn remotely. So you can imagine how much rest we now need, because it was a lot of work to get, not only thinking about the instructional pieces, and I think Barb talked a lot about some of the pieces that were in place, and I'll say that there was some point in June when I was asked to be a part of a discussion where it was a reflection on this kind of quick transition that we all had to make. And when I stopped and thought about it, what I said was something very similar to what Barb said, except I'm a technologist, so this is what I said. I said, the technology was not the problem. We had all of the pieces in place. We were able to get phone service where our staff could answer the phone at home. We could gain access to our systems from home. We had a robust LMS system. We had, so all of the kind of infrastructure that was needed for us to make the transition, not perfect, but a lot of those infrastructures were in place, which did allow us to respond to the pandemic. And I'm with you, Barb. No one wants this, but I do think that over the years, we have invested in those sort of critical technologies that would at least allow us to consider operating in this alternate environment. Today, much like Carroll Community College, Prince George's is very limited. We are, I would say, mostly still pretty much 99% remote work, only essential workers that have to go into the office for, very mission critical type activities. And then as it relates to instruction, similar to what Michelle described at Carroll Community College, very limited instruction for those mostly allied health programs that have accreditation or certificate requirements that require a certain amount of sort of face-to-face touch or, instruction in person. And so we definitely want to maintain compliance with those programs. But for the most part, we are still pretty much dealing with this. And then let's put on top of it, Prince George's County and Montgomery County are in the state, two of the highest. And so we also are still very much impacted by sort of how this pandemic is spreading and moving. So that was a great context in terms of just making sure that the audience understands where each of us are, because I think in our answers and our responses to the dialogue, I think it'll be nice to have that context of we're coming from in some regard kind of different perspectives. So now let's talk about where we all were kind of holding back is what were the challenges? So Michelle, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, challenges. I mean, I think the main challenge was just having absolutely no context for the shift and having no playbook, right? It was just entirely new ground. At Carroll, we are very fortunate to have, for our size institution, a well-staffed online learning team. I'm sure that it would always be more wonderful to have more staff, but we have a director and an instructional designer and some additional support staff who can help with technology and media as needed. We certainly felt a tremendous challenge in getting our faculty prepared to move to remote instruction. And we did a lot of shifting in the early days when we were recognizing that we were going to be moving remote because our campus was shifting from day to day. We weren't exactly sure what was going to happen. It seemed like really, hour by hour, the news was changing. So we tried scheduling face-to-face workshops for our faculty to help them transition their courses to the remote sync offer, or if we felt like we actually went fully online for a couple of weeks right after spring break. So we wanted to help with that transition. But then the campus closed sooner than we initially thought. So we had to shift again. And we made it, and our faculty were resilient. Just like Rhonda mentioned, our online learning team will need a very long and restful winter break, but we made it through. At Carroll, an interesting, I guess, additional layer for us was we were in the process of migrating learning management systems when the shift to remote instruction happened. So we had a situation where most of our faculty and students were in Blackboard, but a percentage of our faculty and students were in Canvas. So we needed to be sure that we were managing needs in both of those LMSs for both of those populations. And then not too long after we shifted to fully remote instruction, as of the 1st of June, we had to get everyone over to Canvas while everyone was working remotely. So that was a new wave of faculty, staff, students, training and orientation that our online learning team needed to manage. Fortunately, it had been a year-long migration, and so we hoped that we were in a very good place in that LMS transition by the time we got to May and June, and I think that proved to be the case, but it made things a little bit more interesting for us. And Rhonda, I think you might still be muted.
Thank you for that. It has to happen at least once in a Zoom webinar. Thank you. I was going to just have a follow-up question and ask you, were there any challenges related to supporting students and faculty in this posture?
I think just being sure that we were capturing everyone, and particularly, I think we felt that the faculty would probably speak up if they needed something, but we were very concerned about maintaining a good level of student support, and particularly maintaining support for students who may not have the technology, whether it's the hardware or the internet connection. And that is a concern. Well, it's a concern I think we're learning everywhere, but in Carroll County, access to broadband internet is not universal. So we needed to be prepared as an institution to provide almost immediate support for technology needs. And truly, that turned out to be the case not only for our students, but in some cases, our faculty and staff needed that support.
Awesome. Barb, do you want to share the challenges at the Mount?
Sure. As I mentioned, we had Canvas. We'd had Canvas for about 2 years, so we were doing pretty well with our learning management system. We were not overly concerned about our grad classes because most of them were making a nice transition. We're primarily an undergraduate institution. Our president, I think most of the presidents at the four-year institutions through the Maryland system or MICUA were meeting back in late February, early March on a daily basis. So we kind of knew this was coming, and we met for about 2 weeks as a leadership team to begin to talk about how we would do this. If our residential students were going home, how is that going to happen? How are we going to do move out? You know, what kind of technology would they need? We have a laptop loaner program. And so if students had loaner laptops, were we going to let them go? And what was the bandwidth? Because our students were going hither and yon. So we had several weeks to have those conversations. The other thing that Tim asked my team was, if we shut down, which of course we ended up doing, how long does the SID team need to transition faculty? Because he was willing to close us for a number of days to make that transition from fully face-to-face to, and we were insistent of our faculty that we needed to transition from face-to-face classrooms to synchronous Zoom. We were not in a position to go all async, and we didn't think that was going to be in the best interest of our students. So the question became, how many days do we need? We started at 10, we got 5. And it was fine. He gave us Monday to Friday, but we also had the Saturday, Sunday of the week before and the week after. So my team had 9 days, and we worked about 12 to 14 hours over those 9 days. We were physically on campus, available to faculty, pulled together very, very fast training sessions. Some face-to-face, we recorded, we Zoomed with some folks that were not comfortable coming to class. The other question that we needed to answer was, how many of our faculty wanted to teach in a Zoom classroom because they're doing stat or computer science or whatever it might be, and they're comfortable walking around a Zoom classroom, writing on glass whiteboards and Zooming their students in? We had to figure that out really quickly because we had 2 Zoom classrooms that were fully constructed, and we had equipment, again, well positioned for 3 portable Zoom classrooms. So we built 3 in 48 hours, temporary Zoom classrooms. So we needed to ascertain which faculty wanted to be in a classroom and which faculty were comfortable or wanted to go home and do this via Zoom on their laptops. So it was a pretty intense 9 days. Another challenge that we had was figuring out whole group professional development versus individual training sessions. And I can't speak for other institutions, but there is no doubt that we learned at the Mount that we just really need to meet our faculty where they are. And the best training and the best movement that we have had on the part of our faculty is through individual one-on-one consultation sessions. We could meet them where they were. We could answer their individual questions. We can respect their content by talking through things. That may work in the humanities, but it's not going to work in a lab science. You know, you can't have those in the weeds discussions when you've got a heterogeneous group of faculty. I recognize that there are many institutions that are too large and don't have the SID staff to do that. But I will say that we had the luxury to do that, and we actually continue to do that. The other couple of other challenges were my entire SID team, as well as our math science team, became the folks, the face of going pandemic. And they all had full administrative back-end access in Canvas. So that when a faculty member got into difficulty, we could remote in with them. That sounds great. It sounds easy, and it is. But we needed to help our faculty understand that we were in there with them. And some of our faculty were not real comfortable with others being in their course with them live, helping them. Because what's in their course is their intellectual property, you know, et cetera. We had a few bumps, but I will say that when they got into difficulty, I don't know how to post this, or I don't know how to create a quiz. When they realized that we're in there with you and in 10 or 15 minutes, we can get to going, they became pretty comfortable with us being those administrative managers. The other challenge, and I will say this was something that we didn't think about. In those 9 days, we did not think about. We didn't think about the fact that we had no consistent plan for how content was going to be delivered. And we didn't figure that out in 9 days. I will be the first to tell you we did not. We were pretty happy to send out hotspots and send laptops home, and for our faculty too, Michelle, we had some that did not have sufficient bandwidth, so we were sending hotspots to students and faculty, and we didn't think about that the upside to Canvas is there's lots of options. The downside to Canvas is there's lots of options, and right, and all of a sudden we got into March and April and realized that we had students taking 5 courses with 5 faculty members, and all 5 faculty members were organizing their content 5 different ways. And our students were lost in terms of how to find things. That was the biggest frustration on the part of our students. And when we talk about what we've learned, I know it's one of our future questions, we'll talk about how we fix that problem. But I'll be the first to tell you that was not on our to-do list during those 9 days.
Thank you for sharing. So I'll say that the themes that I was hearing and what was just described as training definitely is probably at the core of the challenge. And I'll just share that at Prince George's Community College, training was a big challenge for us as well. And I'll say faculty, training our faculty, but also training our students. And when you think about the number of on-campus face-to-face courses that we offered, our students, are asking for more of those as well, because the campus courses, we have more students engaging in that way with us than we do in an online way, which, they're speaking for their preference, which may or may not be directly connected to their technology skill. However, what we saw is when we went remote, it really did expose a lot more of the need and maybe the lack of full knowledge and understanding or comfort with using technology in a more regular way. So we definitely experienced that as well. The access to technology, I think I know Michelle, well, actually both we mentioned, right? We all had the similar problem. Barb said she was sending out hotspots. By the time we couldn't even get our hands on hotspots because they were all sold out by the time we made that revelation that was something that was a need. But I definitely think access to technology and just because I was responsible for sort of the broader, even looking at the workers at the college, not just related to online, we were a little surprised by how many staff didn't have internet or computers at home, right? And some of the things that some of us could take for granted in terms of what we have access to, it was uncovering or exposing that is not something that we can take for granted. And so I think that, and we'll talk about some of the good things that have come out of this, but definitely the access to the technology. Barb, you said something that was really interesting, and I think is a very critical point, is the consistency in the delivery of content. And I'll just say that for those of us that have kind of been in online learning for a long time, and if we're looking at tools like Quality Matters and anything that you look at that talks about quality and online, there is that sort of consistency is really key to a successful online program. One, from a faculty perspective, but more from the students' perspective of being able to have that kind of consistent experience, or even just to be able to know where they would find things, et cetera. And so at Prince George's Community College, and this was one of the things that I'm just be honest, it really surprised me. So many years ago, we adopted Quality Matters. So we already had a quality standard. We had adopted probably in 2007 or 2008, a standard template for our Blackboard courses. We had the standard button set, and we had the standard expectation around how the course were to be set up. At that same time, we made a requirement that all faculty use Blackboard in your face-to-face as well as your online course. And in your face-to-face course, there was just a couple things you had to do, right? All of this, I'm not going to say preparing for the pandemic, but definitely these things that we knew were best practice all along, but that really did position us well if something like a pandemic were to come about. And it was really surprising that even with all of that pre-work that we had done many years ago, when we got to this place, what we realized is what was happening was potentially a little different than at least what we've known or learned from best practice and all of these things. And so that was probably one of the things that surprised me and was a challenge that in some regard, I don't know if I was expecting, just because I think we had thought we had really done a lot of the prep work in that regard. And so I do think that's going to be an interesting thing as we look forward, how we can use this experience to, to benefit from understanding what is needed beyond some of the things that we've done. So those were the challenges. And so now as leaders, now let's talk about our leadership lessons. What did you learn from the need to respond to a pandemic? And then maybe it's what worked and what didn't. And I think in both of the sort of all three of our stories, we hear we tried some things, we had to kind of pull back, and it was definitely, we didn't have a playbook, as Michelle said, we didn't really know how to approach this. So all we could do is lean on our leadership skills and sort of our leadership experiences. So Barb, Michelle, what did you learn? What leadership lessons did you learn?
Well, I'd say for me, the big leadership lessons were the need to be flexible, the need to be willing to pivot, the need to basically, have a lot of self-awareness, take time to self-reflect, see what really was working and what wasn't. And, I like to rely on data whenever I can. And we did that to whatever extent we could at Carroll, particularly as remote instruction continued. But at the end of the day, we needed to, I needed to balance out, the human dimension and be sure that human considerations were front and center, because this was a very emotional set of circumstances and unusual. And so it was kind of a balancing act of taking in whatever information would be useful and informative, but then also making some human-driven decisions. I think I had to quickly learn not to become too connected or invested in a particular approach or path forward, because it was very possible that things were going to pivot and we needed to be responsive to those pivots. And I think that long-term, there might be a lesson to be learned about how to balance out communication in a situation like this. Of course, you want to be very forthright and forthcoming with everyone in terms of plans, but when things are shifting so quickly, timing is really important as well. And really kind of having the conversations to think about how to move forward and then communicating those changes in the best possible ways. Barb, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, gosh, Michelle, I would agree that the human dimension is huge. It was and it continues to be. None of us who do this on a day-to-day basis in terms of supporting faculty and students can do this without some rest and reflection. So that was something my team, Michelle and Rhonda's, I'm sure yours are, I mean, they're tireless and they're incredible. And there were times when I had to say, no, we're gonna shut down this weekend, and everybody's gonna get some rest. So that's absolutely huge and continues to be. Boy, we built that course template really quickly. We realized that was very, very important. We had started to build a template for our grad classes for our MBA, because that's kind of where we were when the pandemic hit. But when we started, as we were keeping in touch with students, which we did, that was probably another leadership lesson, was to try and keep your fingers on the pulse of both your faculty and your students, because faculty may think everything's going well and students don't think so, or vice versa, right? So we need to make sure it's good for everybody. And we realized pretty quickly that students were challenged in Canvas by finding things. We also knew at the Mount, we transitioned to complete synchronous Zoom remote instruction for the remainder of the last academic year. But we also knew from meeting with our president, once we got by those 9 days, we started looking ahead. And we knew that we were going to make an attempt, pandemic pending, that we were going to try and get our students back onto campus face-to-face. And so we made one transition and immediately started planning for another. And what that entailed is we spent the summer building 42 Zoom rooms on our campus, 17 at our Frederick campus, and 12 at our seminary. And that was an incredible effort. And what that meant, and it has been critical to us remaining face-to-face, but what that meant was, faculty pivoted to remote instruction, but then, Michelle, you talked about communication. We had to communicate out to them that we're going to try and bring our students back. So you learn this via your laptop at home. But if you are able to come back face-to-face, because clearly we've got about 30% of our faculty that are completely remote for all the right reasons. But if you are coming back into your classroom, there's some more learning that you need to do. And I have to say that I did mention to our president and our SAFE team that managed this, that I led, when you bring students back, and it doesn't matter to me if it's a P12 school situation or a university, by virtue of social distancing, when you're doing AB groups and we're doing blue gold groups due to social distancing, we're asking faculty to manage students in a classroom and half of those students on a Zoom screen. And as we entered into that decision making, I really had to work very hard to help our team understand that is pedagogically, without a doubt, the hardest thing we ask faculty to do. There is no doubt. And it is. And we continue to be challenged by that. And again, we're helping faculty individually deal with students on a screen, students in a classroom, and then flipping every other day. And how do I manage that? And how do I do exams? And how do I do quizzes? And what proctoring services are we going to use? So I think that's, I'm actually not sure at this point. Once we rest around Christmas time, we're going to think long and hard about the leadership lessons that we've learned by having to manage these AB groups. And I think it's going to come down to some tools are working well for us. And we also have to admit that there are some tools that are not working well. And the other leadership lesson that we talk about every day is not overwhelming faculty with too many tools. We started with a small cadre. We've added one or two. We just added PlayPosit, and we're looking at some proctoring services right now for exams. But we were wise enough. We didn't have a consistent template. That was a mistake we made. But we were wise enough to limit the number of tools we put in front of faculty. If we put too many in front of our faculty, I think we would have paralyzed them. So now we need to decide, we need to get to the point where we make a decision, are they the right tools that we need moving forward? And we've all decided we need to rest a little bit before we make those decisions.
Thank you. So as I listened to that, I was just jotting down some notes, and I think some themes that I heard was around reflection, being able to reflect, communication, which is really critical, and flexibility. And those resonate with me because I know when I think about sort of some leadership lessons, probably one of the biggest lessons that and I'm with you, Barb, we're not out of the woods yet, but at least we have some history. We could look back on the past 7 months and reflect on those. But I will say, when I think about, and I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but the date that we left is probably going to be one of those dates that I will always remember. For us, it was March 13th. That was the date that we left the campus, and for us, we left on March 13th, and we were going into a week of spring break, and we thought, oh, okay, that's great. And when spring break is over, this should be gone. And and so we were preparing. I think when we initially did our initial sort of transition plan, we were expecting to be out for 2 or 3 weeks. And so it was this thing that was going to just kind of, in a couple of weeks, we'll, prepare everybody to be gone for a couple of weeks, and then everything will be back to normal. And so one of as I reflect, and one of the biggest leadership lessons, and maybe it's something that we could have done better, is how do you continue to evaluate the situation? Because we made the decision based on thinking we were going to be gone for 2 weeks, and we put training and we put all of the things in place. And remember, I'm talking now even about the staff who need to support the institution, providing them with the tools that they need for 2 weeks or 3 weeks is very different than if we knew then it was going to be 7 months. And so as leaders, how do we continue to evaluate our situation through today's data metrics and and not just kind of stay with, well, we were only going to be out for two or 3 weeks, and therefore the decisions were all still very much predicated on that sort of perception. And so it is, and I think that speaks to that flexibility. How are we able to continue to understand our current situation, and that we make sure that we're always responding to the current situation, not a situation that was once in the past, and making sure that we're keeping up. And I think that speaks to maybe even somewhat embedded in the culture of higher ed in terms of how we tend to live right, we're definitely either living by semesters or academic years, right? We make decisions, and it's the decision for that period of time. And so to me, this has really shown us that we may, there may even be some other opportunities for us to be flexible and pivot, because we should always be assessing the environment based on what's happening, at that moment. And so I know for us, that was an important lesson, that I learned in that. So while I just wanted to take a moment, because we're on here, the three of us are here with 23 of our friends. And I just want to make sure that this is a conversation for all of us. And so if you are out there listening, we love to monitor the back channel in the chat. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if something we're saying resonates with you, by all means share. If you have a question, put it in the chat. We definitely would like to engage, or even open to hearing, if you have some leadership challenge and some things, if we're asking questions that you would like to share, go ahead and put it in the chat. And we definitely want this to be a full conversation with all of us. So we've talked about where we've come from, where we've come. We've talked about what our challenges are. Now, as we start to look toward the future, what worked well? What's some things that surprised you about what the pandemic sort of forced us to do, but it really worked well, maybe even better than it had worked prior to the pandemic? Let's start with that. And it's open, either one of you can share. Barb, you're unmuted, so if you want to go first.
Sure. Gosh, what worked well? We've talked about professional development, training, and supporting faculty. We did run programming in small groups. And that was okay. What we learned from that is that kind of group professional development works fine for things like compliance and accessibility. But it really was almost an afterthought in March as we were planning our professional development that the SID team said, realizing the nature of what we do and knowing our faculty pretty well, and I think that's a big part of it, is you really need to get to know your faculty and respect how they deliver their content, is we planned these individual consultations. And part of that was us worrying about how faculty going into summer and fall were going to organize their Canvas course based on some of the concerns we heard from students the spring before. And part of it was wanting to support individual faculty. So those individual consultation sessions were almost an afterthought, but they have proven to be the single most powerful thing that we have done. Both in terms of arriving at that consistent look. Once we got the template, we locked certain things in the template, obviously all the university policies that are in there, help buttons, all of that, that's all locked, and trained faculty in what they could and should edit. And once we got that, and that was a quick overview for faculty, we really were able to individually talk with faculty about which tools we felt would help them deliver their content in the most effective way. Did we always recommend the right tools and the right method? No, I'm not gonna fib and say that we always did, but we had developed enough of a trusting relationship through those sessions with individual faculty members that if we didn't hit the right tool or the right method, they would very quickly email and say, well, that was a good attempt, but it didn't work on Monday. What are we going to try on Wednesday? And that's exactly what you want. You want that kind of evolving nature and ongoing reflection, not just by the folks that are managing the instruction from the back end, but the fact that our faculty were willing to reach back to us and say, nah, that didn't work, help me again, Or they also said, they were kind enough to say to us, that was awesome. I'm going to do that again. So we really were able to engage, Rhonda, in what you talked about, that ongoing reflection. Now, we've all taken notes, and we sort of have this pact that when we rest a little bit, we think that there are more lessons that we've learned. We're just too tired to realize what they are quite yet. So that's kind of for Christmas, or between Thanksgiving and Christmas, to go back and sort of take the one step back kind of view, because we do think there are more lessons there for us to learn going into spring.
Thank you, Michelle.
So I think for us, things that, the silver linings, things that were positives from the sudden shift, is that some of the conversations that came to the foreground, I think, are very critical. Conversations about the best ways to engage students. I mean, obviously we were looking at engaging them in new formats and maybe in new ways, but thinking about pedagogy, thinking about whether we needed to make better use of open resources, digital materials, thinking about the importance of accessibility, which suddenly I think really came to the foreground as we shifted. I'm actually, I don't want to preemptively move to the question that Larry's put into the chat, but conversations around accessibility and equity, I think, were maybe bubbling a little bit at Carroll, but we probably would have been positioned in an even better place if that were more on the forefront in February. So I think some of these conversations have been very fruitful for faculty, for students, for the institution. And I hope that what will continue to work well is that there will be less of a thick black line between asynchronous, online, face-to-face, remote synchronous, and that we'll all slowly, when we can catch our breaths, be able to see what works best in given circumstances and for different students and faculty, and be able to put together a model for delivering instruction and engaging students that isn't so, either or.
No, thank you. And once again, I think we are right on the same plane and wavelength around what are some of those things that work really well. And I think one of Michelle's point about the accessibility conversation and pedagogy, this has really thrust us. We've known, and anyone in higher ed, we know how important accessibility is. And we also have known for quite a long time how critical accessibility is to an online program. This particular event it's actually called the question. We had to talk about it. Now we have to talk about it. And I will say that in these short few months, and we advocate for it, and we have institutional priorities, and we understand why all the things that need to happen and should happen can't happen, because definitely there are a lot of priorities and other funding imperatives at the college. But I am just quite amazed, and I think to Barb's point, how many things we've been able to implement in the last 7 months that we may have talked about for years. And so if there's one positive thing that has come out of this, is that we've made some tremendous leaps in some areas that I know we've been advocating, talking, in some instances begging for a long time. And now this has really thrust us into that. So that has been one of a very positive thing. I know for us with accessibility is definitely one of those ones that is a big win for us. I think another thing, again, I'm always have to look at this from the holistic point of view, is we have experienced a tremendous increase in engagement on our campus. And engagement and training, because now, we don't have to worry about whether you could make it on campus, because maybe you were free at the time of the session, but the commute time or something you had to do immediately preceding that would have prevented you from physically being in a place and all the way down to campus-wide meetings. And we are just seeing an increased participation and engagement of and not that we need more meetings, but engagement in just some of these conversations that have been happening on our campus, but maybe people couldn't engage for a variety of reasons. Just the other day at Prince George's Community College, we have a professional development day. And we were doing it online, remotely, because we had to. And I'll just say that it was probably one of the best experiences, because in some ways it's much more intimate, because we got to focus on that sort of event. Whereas if we were in person, it's the big auditorium, it's the people moving around, it's the sidebar conversations, and so there are definitely some things that are working that I would like to, hopefully we can see moving into the future. And then the other thing I'll say for our institution that is something that we are seriously considering, and that is remote instruction as an instructional modality.
Mhm.
And that, right now it is what we have to do because of the scenario with the pandemic. But how do we consider a remote where right? Because right now, pretty much in our offering, it's the two ends of the spectrum. Either you are in the class fully or you are online fully. And although we have hybrid, even in that hybrid model, you still have to commit to fully being in the classroom on a day and then fully online on some other day. And how do we recognize that students may benefit from, I still want the live or the real interaction with my faculty member, but I would like to do it in this environment and not have to, necessarily be in same place, same time. And so I know for us, we're seriously thinking about how we can continue with that, modality as an option of the full ends of the spectrum, of the online learning and a spectrum. So I think that is a big one. So I'm going to go to the chat. I know we have at least a couple questions. So this is for the panelists. If you could talk to your pre-COVID self, let's rewind. If you could talk to Barb and Michelle in February 2020, or maybe February is even too late, because I think we had a little inkling. Let's say a year ago now, if someone had said a pandemic this time last year, we say, oh, what are you talking about? So let's go talk to your pre-COVID self. If there was something that you could have had in place, what is the thing now, what would you have said? I better do this now. If I think this pandemic is coming, what would be something you would have implemented?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll leap in first. It would have been, and again, Mount St. Mary's is a 4-year, very much face-to-face undergrad institution, as is our learning services department. And I always, as we were implementing Canvas, I always had this haunting sort of sense, as we talked to Sid, that we need to get learning services, going into that accessibility issue for students who need accommodations. We need to bring them on board. We need to teach them some of those tools. And we were not there. And learning services had to learn very, very quickly. I wish that we would have front loaded some of that instruction for our learning services folks, because we can talk to faculty about accessibility and we can give them tools, but it is those folks that work in your learning accommodations or learning services department that will be the bridge between students and faculty, because they're the folks that students go to first. So I wish we would have done that a bit sooner, to my pre-COVID self.
Okay, Michelle.
So I think in terms of the learning management system, Carroll was in a very good place when the pandemic hit. We had a template. All of our faculty were required to have some kind of presence in the LMS. So that part of the transition was, it's all relative, right? It was relatively smooth. But I think, I guess to piggyback a little bit on Barb's comment, we probably all could have used some additional training in some of those third-party integrations. So we have Ally, but not all of our faculty were conversant with it. We had Microsoft Teams available to us, but nobody at the institution outside of maybe our IT staff was proficient in it. So I think maybe recognizing that there is some level of urgency to knowing your capabilities when you're at baseline and everything's going well. That's a good reminder to maybe learn what's available to you even at your own institution, or know what's out there if should you need to grab something quickly. So I think that's probably one of our lessons, and we pivoted a lot of services online very quickly at Carroll, and it really was, I think, to the student relatively seamless. But again, that's something that, with hindsight, now you can see that maybe we could have been doing a little bit more in terms of having remote services available to students prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, and so I agree with what both of you said, and that the only thing I would have to add, I guess, is if I could have prepared something differently, I would say for us, or for me, it would be have a better understanding of where our faculty and student, where the needs are. And I think we spent some time initially just learning about where the deficits are. And so how can we always understand, who our faculty are, who our students are, what their needs are. And at least if we understood that, now, ideally it would be understanding that, and then of course we responding and reacting to it. But I think just really, it just highlighted or spotlighted the need to really understand what's going on with, faculty and students, because that is a dimension. And quite honestly, as we think about it now, all of those things were clearly still a part of our environment. This just kind of highlighted it in a different way. And so it's just something about really understanding, maybe getting more information, surveying, doing more needs assessment, and truly understanding where the need is, and trying to respond to those as we can. So another question from the audience is, and I'm going to ask the two of you, how did you handle testing for students with accommodations remotely?
Yeah, boy, right now, every day, that's what we're doing. One size doesn't fit all. And you really do need to have multiple tools available. And the other key is, don't believe everything you read on the website of some of these tools. You've got to test them with your faculty. We've learned that in the last several weeks. You've got to put some of these tools in front of your faculty and help them decide what works best, because we've got faculty that we thought Respondus Lockdown Browser or ProctorU would work for, and we've got those tools. And as we orient faculty, they say, well, I want to do this and I want to do that and I want to do this, and well, that's well outside the parameters of that tool and you can't do that, and we have to be courageous enough to tell them that. So then the conversation goes to, how do we tweak the assessment? So many of our conversations for some very traditional assessments have moved to alternative assessments for students that have accommodations. We do have one of our favorite proctoring tools is, and for students with accommodations, is faculty are perfectly comfortable observing their students in Zoom, taking a quiz or a test. And they've laid out those parameters and they've done practice in terms of taking photos, uploading, whatever it might be. And I have to give our faculty credit. That's pretty time consuming, but they're quite comfortable doing it. Our learning services folks like that option, because with ProctorU, if you have students with anxiety disorder that may be related to another disability, having a stranger in ProctorU stare at you while you are taking an exam has just really freaked out some of our students. It's just not going to work for them. So we've been able to transition some of our students that have those accommodations to faculty that they know, are familiar with, and are comfortable with, and doing that proctoring in Zoom.
At Carroll, a lot of what Barb is mentioning sounds very familiar. At Carroll, principally, we, of course, tried to encourage our faculty to create different kinds of assessment once we moved to remote. But recognizing that that's not always possible, as soon as the campus was reopened, it was a priority to get students back into the testing center who needed it. That was something that, you know, rose to the top of consideration. We also are in the process of just now obtaining a contract for proctoring service. Our faculty have taken to observing students through Microsoft Teams for consequential tests and quizzes, but it is very much a case-by-case scenario in terms of what the student needs and what the faculty can do. And certainly what Barb mentions about some student responses to being proctored online is a very real conversation right now and a very real consideration for us. And genuinely, there's no easy answers here. It very much is a case by case.
Yeah, I think the same. I don't think we're doing much different here either in terms of that. So I see something in the chat. Frederick Community College created a public resource for assessment strategy. So definitely check on the chat and click on that link, and hopefully that'll add some additional support for that. I'm just trying to see if there are any other salient points in the chat. So we have about, let's see, what about 7 minutes left, 8 minutes left. And so in our last 8 minutes, here's what I would like to end with is, so we now have experienced a pandemic, a crisis. We're still in the midst of it, unfortunately, but we are in crises. What should we do to plan for new crises? Or is experiencing a crisis like a pandemic, does this mean that should we ever have to respond to a crisis again, or do we change our operation that it is fluid? So how do we plan for a new crisis, a next crisis or next disaster? Or do we consider this to be the way we operate, in that we should be creating institutions that are just ready, and if you need tomorrow to go home, you do? And so what are your thoughts in terms of how do we prepare in the next disaster, given this experience we have?
Well, I guess I'll go first, Michelle. Everything we read in the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed is that our next crisis is going to be not COVID, but economic in higher ed. And if we pay attention to that and we listen to the futurists, I think that if we are wise, I think what we've learned is to keep our focus on what students need. For a long time, I think we need to be very honest, for a long time in higher ed, we were kind of faculty centric, and I don't mean that at all to be insulting to our faculty, but we were I came from a Research One institution to the Mount because I wanted to go from larger to smaller. And we were all about faculty. And this pandemic has clearly shifted our focus to how do we best meet the needs of our students? And folks, that's where we need to keep our eye right now. We need to meet our students where we are. And Rhonda, you alluded to it, that, and Michelle, you both mentioned that we are going to, I believe, going forward, have this new way of teaching and learning in higher ed that is remote instruction. I mean, we've talked about it at the Mount. That's why we built 42 Zoom rooms. We were challenged pre-pandemic with our athletes being here, there, and everywhere, missing instruction, and our students studying abroad and not being able to access instruction, or students being ill, or right, the list goes on. And with the technology, hardware, software tools that we have now, we should not be challenged by that any longer. We can meet our students where they are, and we should. And I think that is going to, how we do that, how we get good at that, how we keep reflecting on that is I think going to be the focus of our discussions going forward.
And before you respond, Michelle, I was in the chat, someone said even faculty appreciate remote learning. And I think even some of the examples you gave, Barb, about students, we have exactly the same scenario when a faculty goes to a conference or a faculty member is sick. And so how that, we've been dealing with these kinds of interruptions over the years, except our solution didn't fully leverage the technology that's been available. And so I think if we do learn that from this pandemic, I think we all will land in a good place. Michelle?
Agree with everything that's been said. I think, keeping that student focus in terms of managing the next crisis, my personal feeling is each of our, number one, let's hope that we never have a crisis on this scale ever again. But at whatever level, being flexible, being able to pivot, being student focused. I think for me, it's, professionally thinking about what values drive the institution, what values drive my own decision making, and, trying to keep that center in an unfortunate situation of whatever level it might be. So just being ready to respond and be a learner in every situation and have that opportunity to change, grow, make decisions that are appropriate to the institution.
Thank you. And I just to close it, I don't have anything to add. I think everything that's been said is echoed here. I do want to just circle back and just kind of give another acknowledgement to something Barb said about economic crises, because coming off of this pandemic, I think we can safely say institutions across the country are now challenged with financial crises. And so as we think, and we talked a lot about technology and we talked a lot, right? So then those things cost money. I know for us, we've added a lot of new technology to support this new environment. And what we know is, in this kind of adding a new modality, there are costs associated with that. And so the question is, as we have the increased need for the technology to be able to support this flexibility and these alternate environments, how do we juxtapose that with the reality that, student maybe enrollments are not where they were, and even though we are providing this broader service to those students who are here, we are seeing drops in enrollment, and therefore, right, that is directly related to our revenue. How do we manage that in the same environment? And so I think the financial economic component is going to be an important piece. Any thoughts financially about how we can now, manage the next normal, given the financial constraints we most likely will face?
I think being ready to respond to whatever our prospective students and the workforce tell us is going to be pivotal. I know at my institution, as a community college, we had the expectation that fall was going to be up for us because that's what happened in previous recessions. So we were using a previous model and that didn't really materialize. So now we really need to listen to what the anecdotal evidence is telling us to help guide where the college needs to go to meet needs in our community.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Michelle. I think another positive that has come out of the pandemic is I think we're all looking at data in real time now, perhaps in ways that we never did before. And not just data from our students or from our faculty, but also from our alum, from our business community, education community, those that we have been charged to serve. And again, I do think that you know, in higher education, right? What is it we used to say in higher ed, that changing in higher ed was like turning or stopping an oil tanker, right? That it took that long and it was that big. Well, folks, we're clearly not there anymore. You know, we are transitioning and evolving in ways in higher ed that I don't think we ever anticipated. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. And I think the next piece that we need to do is to continue to respond to those that we are serving. I would agree, Michelle.
Thank you. So what we know is that, you know, what they say, out of a crisis comes opportunity, and innovation is often spawned by a crisis or some unexpected situation, clearly what we've all experienced for the past 7 months. So as we bring this webinar to a close, what I would say is that for everyone on the line is that we use this as an opportunity to become our best selves and be our most innovative selves, and try to find as much opportunity and carry forth all of the positive that has come out of this very daunting and stressful time that we've experienced over the past 7 months. I wish we could end this webinar by saying it's over and we are really reflecting, but unfortunately we still don't know what's to come. So we will continue thriving, surviving, and hopefully we will be thriving soon. Thank you everyone for joining us. This was an awesome conversation, and look forward to seeing you all in the future at another webinar soon.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Okay,
Thank you all.
bye.